No. No. Get from Loki. No. He's so cute. No. Go. Back up. Okay. Reasonable over rational. Aiming to be mostly reasonable. See, here we go. Works better than trying to be coldly rational. Okay. Being reasonable. You are not a spreadsheet. You are a person. A screwed up, emotional person. It took me a while to figure this out, but once it clicked, I realized it's one of the most important parts of finance. With it comes something that often goes overlooked. Do not aim to be coldly rational when making financial decisions. Aim to just be pretty reasonable. Reasonable is more realistic, and you have a better chance of sticking with it for the long run, which is what matters most when managing money. To show you what I mean, let me tell you the story of a guy who tried to cure syphilis with malaria. Wow. I need my chapstick. My lips is dry. Look, see, look. Loki, no, move. Loki, move. Loki, move. 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 I'm trying to squeeze into him because if he gets a little uncomfortable, he might move. I'm not squeezing enough. I don't want to hurt him. Move, Loki. Oh my goodness. Look at him. Loki, move. I'm trying to read my book and he's trying to be a puppy dog. No. Lay down. All right. Thank you guys. I'm so sorry. All right. I'll read the last sentence to catch up the new people who are here. I don't ever want to see you and I never want to miss you again. No fair. Ah. Okay. Sorry, I had to send it to the homies to see if the homies were like, yeah, let me support that girl. Okay. It says, to show you what I mean, let me tell you the story of a guy who tried to cure syphilis with malaria. Here we go. Julius Wagner Jahreg was a 19th century psychiatrist with two unique skills. He was good at recognizing patterns, and what others saw as crazy, he found merely bold. His specialty was patients with severe neurosyphilis, then a fatal diagnosis with no known treatment. He began noticing a pattern. Syphilis patients tended to recover if they had the added misfortune of having prolonged fevers with an unrelated ailment. Wagner Jahreg assumed this was due to a hunch that had been around for centuries, but doctors didn't understand well. Fevers play a role in helping the body fight infection, so he jumped to the logical conclusion. In the early 1900s, Wagner Jahreg began injecting patients, oh my goodness, with low-end strains of typhoid malaria and smallpox to trigger fevers strong enough to kill off their syphilis. This was as dangerous as it sounds. Some of his patients died from the treatment. He eventually settled on a weak version of malaria, since it could be effectively countered with quinine after a few days of bone-rattling fevers. After some tragic trial and error, his experiment worked. Wagner Jahreg reported that 6 in 10 syphilis patients treated with malariotherapy recovered, compared to around 3 in 10 patients left alone. He won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1927. The organization today notes, the main work that concerned Wagner Jahreg throughout his working life was the endeavor to cure mental disease by including a fever. Penicillin eventually made malariotherapy for syphilis patients obsolete. Thank goodness. Okay. But Wagner Yareg is one of the only doctors in history who not only recognized fevers with an S, fever's role in fighting infection, but also prescribed it as a treatment. Fevers have always been as feared as they are mysterious. Ancient Romans worshipped Febris, the goddess who protected people from fevers. Amulets were left at temples to placate her, hoping to stave off the next round of shivers. Thanks for the likes. But Wagner Yareg was onto something. Fevers are not accidental nuances. They do play a role in the body's road to recovery. We now have better, more scientific evidence of fevers with an S, usefulness in fighting infection. A 1-degree increase in body temperature has been shown to slow the replication rate of some viruses by a factor of 200. Numerous investigators have identified a better outcome among patients who displayed fever. One NIH paper writes, the Seattle Children's Hospital includes a section on its website to educate parents who may panic at the slightest rise in their child's temperature. Fevers turn on the body's immune system. They help the body fight infection. Normal fevers between 100 and 104 are good for sick children. But that's where the science ends and reality takes over. Fever is almost universally seen as a bad thing. They're treated with drugs like Tylenol to reduce them as quickly as they appear. Despite millions of years of evolution as a defense mechanism, no parent, no patient, few doctors, and certainly no drug company views fever as anything but a misfortune that should be eliminated. These views do not match the known science. One study was blunt. Treatment of fever is common in the ICU setting and likely related to standard dogma rather than evidence-based practice. Howard Markel, director of the Center for the History of Medicine, once said of fever phobia, these are cultural practices that spread just as widely as the infectious disease that are behind them. Why does this happen? If fevers are beneficial, why do we fight them so universally? I don't think it's complicated. Fevers hurt, and people don't want to hurt. That's it. A doctor's goal is not just to cure disease. It's to cure disease within the confines of what's reasonable and tolerable to the patient. Fevers can have marginal benefits in fighting of infection, but they hurt. And I go to the doctor to stop hurting. I don't care about double-blind studies when I'm shivering under a blanket. If you have a pill that can make a fever stop, give it to me now. It may be rational to want a fever if you have an infection, but it's not reasonable. That philosophy, aiming to be reasonable instead of rational, is one more people should consider when making decisions with their money. Academic finance is devoted to finding the mathematically optimal investment strategies. My own theory is that in the real world, people do not want the mathematically optimal strategy. They want the strategy that maximizes for how well they sleep at night. Harry Markowitz won the Nobel Prize for exploring the mathematical trade-off between risk and return. He was once asked how he invested his own money and described his portfolio allocation in the 50s when his models were first developed. I'm going to quote him. I visualized my grief if the stock market went way up and I wasn't in it, or if it went way down and I was completely in it. My intention was to minimize my future regret, so I split my contributions 50-50 between bonds and equities. Markowitz eventually changed his investment strategy, diversifying the mix. But two things here are important. One is that minimizing future regret is hard to rationalize on paper, but easy to justify in real life. A rational investor makes decisions based on numeric facts. A reasonable investor makes them in a conference room surrounded by coworkers you want to think highly of you. With a spouse you don't want to let down, or judged against the silly but realistic competitors that are your brother-in-law, your neighbor, and your own personal doubts. Investing has a social component that's often ignored when viewed through a strictly financial lens. The second is that this is fine. Jason Zweig, Z-W-E-I-G, Zweig, who conducted the interview when Markowitz described how he invested, later reflected, "My own view is that people are neither rational nor irrational. We are human. We don't like to think harder than we need to, and we have unceasing demands on our attention." Seen in that light, there is nothing surprising about the fact that the pioneer of modern portfolio theory built his intentional portfolio with so little regard for his own research, nor is it surprising that he adjusted it later. Markowitz is neither rational or irrational. He's reasonable. What's often overlooked in finance is that something can be technically true, but contextually nonsense. In 2008, a pair of researchers from Yale published a study arguing young savers should supercharge their retirement accounts using 2-to-1 margin, $2 of debt for every dollar of their own money, when buying stocks. It suggests investors taper that leverage as they age. It suggests that investors taper that leverage as they age, which lets a saver take more risk when they're young and can handle a magnified market roller coaster and less when they're older. Even if using leverage left you wiped out when you were young, if you use 2-to-1 margin, a 50% market drop leaves you with nothing. The researchers showed savers would still be better off in the long run so long as they picked themselves back up, followed the plan, and kept saving in a 2-to-1 leveraged account the day after being wiped out. The math works on paper. It's a rational strategy, but it's almost absurdly unreasonable. No normal person would watch 100% of their retirement account evaporate and be so unfazed that they carry on with the strategy undeterred. They'd quit, look for a different option, and perhaps sue their financial advisor, like Rihanna. The researchers argued that when using their strategy, the expected retirement wealth is 90% higher compared to the life cycle funds. It is also 100% less reasonable. There is, in fact, a rational reason to favor what look like irrational decisions. Here's one. Let me suggest that you love your investments. This is not traditional advice. It's almost a badge of honor for investors to claim they're emotionless about their investments because it seems rational. But if lacking emotions about your strategy or the stocks you own increases the odds you'll walk away from them when they become difficult, what looks like rational thinking becomes a liability. The reasonable investors who love their technically imperfect strategies have an edge because they're more likely to stick with those strategies. There are few financial variables more correlated to performance than commitment to a strategy during its lean years. Both the amount of a performance and the odds of capturing it over a given period of time. The historical odds of making money in U.S. markets are 50-50 over one-day periods. 68% in one-year periods, 88% in 10-year periods, and so far 100% in 20-year periods. Anything that keeps you in the game has a quantifiable advantage. If you view do what you love as a guide to a happier life, it sounds like empty fortune cookie advice. If you view it as the thing providing the endurance necessary to put the quantifiable odds of success in your favor, you realize it should be the most important part of any financial strategy. Invest in a promising company you don't care about, and you might enjoy it when everything's going well, but when the tide inevitably turns, you're suddenly losing money on something you're not interested in. It's a double burden, and the path of least resistance is to move on to something else. If you're passionate about the company to begin with, you love the mission, the product, the team, the science, whatever. The inevitable downtimes when you're losing money or the company needs help are blunted by the fact that at least you feel like you're part of something meaningful. That can be the necessary motivation that prevents you from giving up and moving on. There are several other times when it's fine to be reasonable instead of rational with money. There's a well-documented home bias where people prefer to invest in companies from the country they live in while ignoring the other 95% plus of the planet. It's not rational until you consider that investing is effectively giving money to strangers. If familiarity helps you take the leap of faith required to remain backing those strangers, it's reasonable. Day trading and picking individual stocks is not rational for most investors. The odds are heavily against your success, but they're both reasonable in small amounts if they scratch an itch hard enough to leave the rest of your more diversified investments alone. Investor John Brown, who advocates and mostly owns diversified funds, once explained why he owns a smattering of individual stocks. I'm not buying individual stocks because I think I'm going to generate alpha, which is outperformance. I just love stocks and have ever since I was 20 years old, and it's my money. I get to do whatever. Quite reasonable. Most forecasts about where the economy and the stock market are heading most forecasts about where the economy and the stock market are heading next are terrible, but making forecasts is reasonable. It's hard to wake up in the morning telling yourself you have no clue what the future holds, even if it's true. Acting on investment forecasts is dangerous, but I get why people try to predict what will happen next year. It's human nature. It's reasonable. Jack Bogle, the late founder of Vanguard, spent his year on a crusade to promote low-cost passive index investing. Many thought it interesting that his son found a career as an active, high-fee hedge fund and mutual fund manager. Bogle, the man who had high-fee funds violate the humble rules of arithmetic, invested some of his own money in his son's funds. What's the explanation? We do some things for family reasons, Bogle told the Wall Street Journal. If it's not consistent, well, life isn't always consistent. Indeed, it rarely is. That was chapter 11. So now for my own sanity, before we start chapter 12,